Thank you, everyone who's dialed in to join to listen to the Mariana webinar on transitioning to AI-assisted batch release, particularly integrating paper batch records with digital manufacturing data systems. When we sent out this invite, I've only been at Mariana a little bit less than a year. I've held one before, and we got 30 or 40 attendees. We had over 140 registrants, so I know this is quite a bit of interest in this topic. Anyway, so thank you for joining. I also want to thank my co-panelists, Bryan Holmes from Andelyn Biosciences. Uh, he'll introduce himself on the next slide. Robert Meyer from Merck, then myself. There were so many attendees, I could not list them all, but just to give you a sense of who was interested, we've got a lot of people from Pfizer and J&J and Kenvue and Viatris and Larimar, Amgen and Gilead and Reckitt and MilliporeSigma, as well as Merck, obviously. In terms of the brands, we've got many CDMOs, Sharp Services, Formulated Solutions, and others, and plenty of consultants also interested in the topic from IBM and Capgemini and NTT and Infinity, 140 in total. So you're in good company. But you didn't come here just to hear from me. You came to hear with my co-panelists. So the first question, Robert, why don't you tell us a little bit about your company and your role there?
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. So hi everybody. I'm Bob Meyer. I am at Merck and Company Inc. from Rahway, New Jersey in the USA, not to be confused uh, I guess the same as MSD, as it's known outside of the US. And Merck, we're a Fortune 500 company for making branded human health drugs as well as animal health products. Been doing it for about 130 years. And within that company, I sit within our small molecule science and technology area in manufacturing division, where we do, like I personally do new technology development, but it's towards the service of bringing new products to market, mostly tablets and capsules, things like that. And I'm always on the lookout for new technologies to help us bring our new products to market, a little bit faster, cheaper, better. And so that's why I'm here today to talk about the work we've been doing with Mariana.
Hey, hey, thank you, Robert. First of all, thank you for the clarity. You saw MilliporeSigma on there, as well as other people from Merck and Merck KGaA, the group. So thanks for the clarity. I'm sure people will appreciate that. Bryan, how about yourself? Tell us a little bit about your company and what your role is there.
Yeah, good morning, everyone. Bryan Holmes, Vice President of Digital and Technology Solutions at Andelyn. I've been with Andelyn a little over 4 years now, leading up the IT function, building things out from scratch. Andelyn is a gene therapy CDMO, so that was carved out of Nationwide Children's Hospital. We became an entity officially September 1st of 2020, but I've been was part of the hospital doing the development work for about 15 years prior to that. Our company is actually named after the first two patients to receive clinical trials, Andrew and Evelyn. And just from a note yesterday, we had held a golf outing, to raise funds for the rare disease community, and it was the first time that Andrew and Evelyn actually met in person with each other yesterday. So it was really a heartwarming event, and helps us see how close we are to the patient and in the rare disease community. So again, been responsible for all things on the digital ecosystem, and been working with Leonard in different capacities over the years, and excited to talk about how we're looking at AI right now.
Hey, thanks, Bryan. Hey, it wasn't planned, guys, but I like the fact that we've got someone from, development clinical and someone from the commercial side, but as well as someone that works for, I don't know how old Merck is, it's got to be over 100 years, Bob, and then someone kind of on the more, modern, more current spectrum, right, with the viral vectors and cell therapy. So I think we really cover a broad spectrum there. So thank you.
Yeah.
All right, let's see what else. So collectively, you represent different phases of the pharma manufacturing. I just referred to it, Bob, on the earlier phases, and Bryan on the early phases, but also on the later phases. How significant is the batch release process? Does it matter what phase? Is it more significant in the commercial side, less significant in the clinical side? Bob, since you're the earlier phase, I'll let you go first again. What do you think?
Sure. I mean, yeah, it's definitely different. When a new molecule comes into, the first stages of clinical development, not very much is known about its, what's going to make the product have the purity, the desired performance in the body, right? We don't even know what dose to give. So of course we have what we call just phase dependent standards that evolve as a product moves from the early clinical to mid and late stage clinicals and ultimately to commercial, where things get locked into very very cleanly and clearly for routine commercial production. So yeah, it's absolutely phase dependent, and we try to learn as quickly as we can and adjust our quality standards and manufacturing requirements along the way.
That makes sense. Brian, what's your view of that? Because you really cover a bigger spectrum.
Yeah, so we're from early stage development through ultimately through commercial batches, and I think as Bob mentioned there, phase appropriateness is something that is something we're looking and trying to implement in the correct manner, which is it's a challenge from a different quality perspectives. As how do you have one hat on at one point in time in the life cycle, but not at another point in time? So I think it goes down to looking at from different risk areas, what the critical process parameters are, looking at different aspects of the process. So I know that's something that we're certainly continue to evaluate. But in the end, if it's a product that's going to be ingested or injected into the human body, that it has to have obviously the right levels of controls, whether it's early stage or late stage or commercial. So same type of rigor goes into it, and it can be a long process.
Yep, that makes sense. All right, I didn't mean this to turn into a sparring match, but you guys represent different entities, right? Brand sponsor and a CDMO. Who releases the batches in your case, and do you see any friction between the entities? Brian, I'll let you go first. We've worked with many companies, and the answer I know is different. The bottom right-hand corner, you see the process of a tech transfer. We'll have another webinar on that another day. But talk to me about who does the batch release in your world.
I mean, it's definitely a joint activity, right? So that there's a I guess ultimately release decisions on both sides. So a CDMO, again, my opinion, my stance, but I'm the IT guy, not the one actually releasing the product, is that the CDMO basically releases it to the sponsor, and then the sponsor then releases it to the market afterwards. There's definitely a lot of back and forth between from investigations, different analysis, things that go into the release process, but we would release it to our sponsor, and then they release it to the market. That's how I look at it.
Okay, that's fair. Bob, what's your view of that?
Yeah, I think you described it well, Brian. But as you said, ultimately, all the parties have to align on, yeah, this is a high quality product that meets our standards and is okay to give to people. And so, yeah, unfortunately, when the more parties that are involved in the analysis, the more people that have to agree, and the slower it takes. So I guess it can go slower as a consequence. There's a lot of coordination and communication that has to happen. So sometimes that can lead to some friction, especially when you're don't all speak the same language, don't all sit in the same time zone, can't meet face to face. So there's friction, but I think we all are aligned on the common mission of high quality products getting released to the market.
But serendipitously on this topic, the POC we're working on together, right, is actually releasing a batch that you get from a CDMO. Right? So we'll drill into those details a little bit. But okay. In your experience, how long does a typical batch review take, and what is the impact of a slow process? So the marketing people who prepared this deck for me said, Leonard, why this picture? It's like not even relevant. And what it really was, what it really was is it's my prompts to tell a story, but it was a small, single asset pharma company with one quality person who was on vacation the day before the batch was ready, and it didn't get released for like 2 weeks. I think she went to an Indian wedding, right? You know how long they can be. So anyway, so literally you're tying up all that working capital and maybe backlog and short supply, all those things. But in your world, what's the impact of a slow process? And Robert, I'll let you go first.
I mean, yeah, certainly we do everything we can to understand in my case, often the clinical timelines, or sometimes it's stability timelines, why we're making a batch, understand where we fit into that, and try to never be the bottleneck towards, hitting the timelines, right? So, yeah, you never want your patient to go off drug. That's pretty well understood. And so you're going to build in plenty of buffer in your timeline in order to accommodate however long a release process might take. Um, so when there's uncertainty in how long it'll take, or variability, or just a long process, maybe it's consistently long. What that does to someone like me is it means we have to start our batches sooner, which means we really don't know as much about the product. We haven't had as much time to do the R&D work that goes into defining our process, defining our product. And so it kind of squeezes our timelines. And ultimately we end up going into that batch with less knowledge. And sometimes that means that you have to take more risks in the batch, and you might have unforeseen problems because you didn't do enough experiments ahead of the batch, so that can, of course, result in some deviations in the process, some quality notifications, that kind of thing. So, yeah, but ultimately, the longer we take in the release process, the less time we have up front to do experimentation. That's the big impact for me.
Yeah. There are some quality people on the call. By risk in the batch, he didn't mean anything that wouldn't go under QA scrutiny.
No,
So,
of course. But I mean, right, again, I sit in the clinical development space. So,
yeah, yeah.
The point of experimentation is to learn things, right? You don't always know
Yeah.
what works and what doesn't. When you get to the actual clinical batch, or the commercial registration batch, registration stability, that kind of thing, like you're locking in your process at that point. You're not deviating from the protocol. But we do a lot of experimentation before that. And if we don't have enough experimentation, then again, we don't know what parameters to target when we write that batch protocol. And
Right.
batches do fail occasionally because, they
Yeah.
we just didn't know enough about the product when we made it.
Yeah. All right, Brian, speaking of failed batches and long timelines.
Yeah, no, for us in gene therapy and the type of products we make in the AAV space, the batch release timeline is very long compared to other areas in the industry that a lot of us are more familiar with, right? So we came in and found out that batch release could be anywhere from 4 to 6 months versus 17-day turnaround time. It sort of made a lot of our heads explode. We kind of look at that and say, well, what is it? Right now, there's a number of different aspects to it, and I think when you look at like the combination of as Bob mentioned, the stability tests, or looking at the different lab tests, and if you have to send it away to a certain lab to get the results in, and obviously the last couple of years have been a different type of environment that we've been working in, post pandemic and everything there. But you have that, you have the investigations, the closeout of those. We've had and the actual time to go through the batch record and ensure that everything is done accurately. And when you're doing that on a paper batch record, I think that's really the crux of what we're trying to get to here, is that the human element of it certainly takes a lot of time, and then it's the context and understanding what's in there, and they will say that the user experience of reviewing a paper batch record, and how is that designed compared to something else, and it certainly takes a while and results in additional investigations that slows things down.
So, Brian, we should have put a health warning on this webinar when you told people a batch could take 4 to 6 months to release, right?
Yeah.
A few heart attacks just occurred. All right, let's drill a little deeper and get into the problem. Let's discuss some of the drivers, how many people are involved, what's the skill needed, what would your PhDs be doing if they didn't have to spend so much time on this? Do you see some friction between manufacturing and Q&A? This picture on the bottom right, by the way, it's got some real numbers. We're talking to not either of you guys, a different brand, and they said it took 6 PhDs 10 days, and I thought that was longer, right, until I heard your 4 to 6 months. And that's just a stat. Who cares, right? But what they really said was it's undermining the commercialization of the product. Just the level of effort and the tying up of that working capital. So, Brian, what's your view of that? Like, how many people are involved? What's the skill needed? What kind of?
There's definitely several people from a QA team that's involved. So we have a large number of scientists across our organization. PhDs, infiltrated throughout, folks that have a real deep understanding of a product and process, and some I'll say really really smart folks that are working here. And if they're spending that time going through paperwork and trying to see, not the did you miss something in a box, did something change, or and again, our batch records change pretty frequently because it's small volume, ultra rare products or for disease that we're going after, that it's something that they have to then have that eye to look for everything, to make sure that the directions were followed, the instructions were followed, that the right records were captured in the right manner, and how that then factors into the downstream impacts of the product. So it's a labor intensive process of really looking at how to go through an entire I don't know, 400 or 500 page batch record, and you put all the different combinations together of the way we're doing it, and it certainly becomes complex undertaking to go through that.
Yeah, and 400 or 500 page is common even outside of gene therapy, right? So it's not that unusual. But yeah, hey Bob, how about your view of this?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, most of my products I work on are, again, tablets and capsules, things that are
Yeah.
a little bit simpler than changing someone's genome, but still, yeah, the batch records are easily a few hundred pages a lot of times. So how many people are involved? I mean, it really depends on the complexity of the product, of course, and sometimes you can just add bodies, but we typically, I kind of separate it out into the what I'll call the technical review that Brian was kind of talking about, and then the quality review. Like quality, they do many things, but they're making sure that the protocol was followed, and that we I guess met all the quality management system requirements along the way of making the product, as well as hitting our release requirements. The technical review is almost in some ways a little bit fuzzier, that it's saying, did anything unusual happen in this batch? Because again, this product is not fully commercialized yet, and we're still learning things. And so a lot of times we'll add bodies to do those reviews, to look for things that deviate from what one might expect from what you understood on the product going into the batch. So the skill needed, sometimes it's more PhD, sometimes we have a lot of bachelor's level engineers that take a look at these things as well. But of course, if as I said in the last one, thinking about what would we do if we didn't spend so much time looking at batch records and reviewing them, we'd have to absolutely be in the lab doing more experiments, or kind of implementing what we learned for in preparation for our next campaign, where we're going to be changing a few things to make the product better. So yeah, again, don't really see too much friction, other than what comes along with the timeline pressures of getting product out the door, which I think is hopefully we don't take it, manufacturing and QA don't take it out on each other. It's more like, hey, we're all under the gun, we got to get this done.
So both of you gentlemen, I want to thank you for taking the journey to get me to here in this conversation. We're here to talk about AI-assisted batch release, but I wanted people to know that, like, when I meet quality people and I say AI-assisted batch release for paper batches, they you don't know what you're talking about. You don't know how complicated the process is. It's never going to happen. You've been listening to too many people talk about AI. You get the idea. So I wanted to cover that background. I have one more sort of background slide, because a lot of people say, isn't that an MES thing, right? So before we jump into the AI-assisted batch release, Bob, and I'll start with you. How much do you rely on MES for paper batches, and why is the move to MES not as fast and ubiquitous as one would think?
Yeah, sure. So again, in my space, there's the earlier in the process, or I guess earlier in the clinical development cycle that you are, the more flexibility you need in your solution, and your solution of how you document what you're making. So paper, as painful as it is in some aspects, it is ultimately flexible in that you can, I can type up a Word document right now and, have myself a batch record, an hour from now. MES is, unfortunately, the systems we use are pretty complex, and we tend not to use them uh, routinely until we get to commercial production. And then even there, we I guess there's an interim state where we sometimes we talk about MES heavy and MES light, whereas
Mhm.
like a MES heavy is like every step in the protocol is executed in the electronic system, versus light is just like, well, maybe we just do the major transactions like charging of materials and subtracting them from inventory and then charging the finished product to inventory.
Yep.
So there's even different levels of implementation of MES. But ultimately the reason the move to MES is not fast and ubiquitous is it's hard. It takes very specialized skills. It takes a long time to make sure that things are done properly in MES, and we find it's not efficient and not flexible until we get to the point where the process and the product are fully defined and very locked down.
Yep, that makes sense. Brian, how about you? What's your view of this? You think only
Yeah.
commercial, or even then it's tough?
Yeah, I think Bob, just put it perfectly, right? From an industry perspective, and again, with the number of different pharma companies I've been at and different areas of responsibility, if you're doing a lot of similar routines, that's when it's easier to automate and digitize in an MES. If you're in earlier stages and you need the flexibility, the tools aren't as easily accommodating to that right now. I think industry is moving towards that more, but as you mentioned, like the specialized skill set that's required, I always use the term it's a lifestyle, right? If you're going to go with an MES and do that, it is a lifestyle change for an organization that it's really a level of discipline. When you need the flexibility, how do you accommodate that flexibility with the system side? Do you need that skill set, across the organization who understands both the business processes and the system, which is not always that easy to find, right? It's especially when you're starting out. So I think the thing that seen is that from not having that flexibility in place, that there becomes an adoption issue. It becomes more of a challenge going forward, and the value proposition for an MES is it's really twofold. It's for process execution and ensuring that you're cutting out deviations in that process. Well, if you have a flexible process in which there's that it's going to change, maybe that value prop goes down lower. And the second one is really having that data accessible in a digitized format, and those are kind of the two areas. And I think that depending on what stage of the product and process you're in, that the flexibility is the biggest challenge and hurdle to
Yep,
overcome.
yep, that makes sense. All right. So Bob, believe it or not, you really gave me like the springboard for the next slide when you talked about, MES, MES heavy, MES light, and you could see, my comment across the top of here, paper will always be a part of the ecosystem. Even if you're in an MES system, you might be part MES and part paper. You might have C of A come on a PDF, excuse me, from the lab. You might have a weight slip. You get the idea. So how valuable would it be to have a system that works across this? So I don't want the listeners to come here and say it's AI assisted batch release paper or it's MES. I mean, we've done batch release for people who have MES systems. If it's the light, for example, MES, we have people that have different MES systems across different phases of the process. We have people that have an MES, but a lot of other paper involved. You get the idea. So it's not like an either or. It's like, how do we integrate one process? So for those on listeners, and I know you guys have seen pictures like this. On the left-hand side is a genealogy created from paper batches, right? I will aggregate it together, across every material and every operation. In the middle is a paper batch, and on the right-hand side is what an AI-assisted batch release would look like. And you can see the bounding boxes. You can see the stuff in green that says, oh, we expected the number to be 6, and it's 5.5, or it should be in a range between 7 and 10, and 6 is out of that range. And then, the green says, hey, this should be passed automatically, and the red stuff needs review, including things like comments and Sometimes there's yellow. I didn't put yellow on this screen. But it's the idea of how do we aggregate all of the documents around a batch, whether the batch is paper or not, and whether there's an MES and a LIMS and a ERP system involved, right? That you can do quote unquote fingertip investigations and extract the relevant key and critical parameters to do trending. I know that's a lot of words, but Brian, I'm going to start with you. I mean, how cool would it be to have a process that integrates everything, right, for a batch across the systems and the paper?
Yeah, I think obviously I wouldn't be here right now talking about this if I didn't think this was really a game changer from an industry side of it. That as you mentioned, I mean, paper's a big part of this. The effort to do digital transformation is expensive, and it also, as we talked about just now, takes away that flexibility that's needed in different areas. So paper is going to be a part of it for a while going forward. Where we are as a technology, industry, we have the ability to really put everything and pull everything together to take away that the time that's spent trying to dot the I's and cross the T's to now being able to go in and do the analysis and to really see things at a more holistic level as if things were digitized. So for me, the ability to be able to go in and bring everything together to help with investigations, that if you can imagine an investigation comes out and you have to go to a filing cabinet, or if you have to go to bunch of PDFs to search on a piece of equipment. When was this used? Where was this used? A where used query against paper is not that easily executed, right? So just the simple things like that are now at our fingertips is really exciting for me, and definitely an industry game changer for one that has so much reliance on paper still.
Yeah. I like the way you said it. It's like it's a digital journey, and you want to bring the paper along into that process, right? You don't want to have to go to the file cabinet at the same time while you're digitizing yourself, and this is a way to do that. So, Bob, how about you? I know you've seen the genealogy on the left-hand side. We're working with some of your team on the batch review. How useful would it be to have all this in one place?
Yeah, the to use an acronym I use a lot internally. I believe fundamentally in fair data, right? That it is ultimately what we need to be working towards across our not just pharma industry, really all industries, right? So fair, for anyone unfamiliar, it stands for findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. And it just means like that I guess paper is not fair in that it's hard to find information in it because it's in a file cabinet. It's hard to access it because the cabinet's locked. It's not interoperable because you can't pull it out and use it elsewhere without very easily. So all throughout my work, I've been trying to make our data more fair, and so that includes the paper batch records that we use, and so it's ultimately, yeah, Brian talked about manufacturing deviations or one use. A lot of times you got to go and really dig through the data to see what happened, but on the development side of things, we're also the data in these batch records, a lot of times we use it as part of our product registration or as part of our next development campaign. And we want to do trending across things. We want to continuously improve the product. And so, the we need the data in a lot of cases. And, the alternative to doing this is paying, highly skilled engineers to comb through batch records manually and copy and paste things into Excel tables, and that's just that's not a part of their job that they enjoy. They enjoy analyzing the data, not finding and extracting it. And so there's this old kind of Pareto principle. 80% of the data analyst time is spent collating data, moving it, adjusting it, and only 20% is the value added, like analyzing it, understanding it, drawing conclusions, and that kind of thing. And so I want to shift that, so we only spend 20% of the time manipulating data and a lot more time analyzing it. So a tool like this is helps us get that.
Yeah, no, well said, Bob. I appreciate that. And by the way, I like your fair data. I know it's not trademarked yet, but Brian Holmes likes to call it datization.
Yeah.
Oh
Well,
yeah.
but for anybody unfamiliar, right, there's this great website out there. It's go-fair.org. This fair data movement, again, it spans industries, and I don't know about trademarks, but it's certainly it's not something I came up with. It's
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I encourage everybody, if you want to learn more about how to make your data more fair and that kind of thing,
Yep.
check out that
No,
website. I'll type it in the
that's good
chat.
insight. Yeah, I appreciate that. Thank you. All right, the next one. You're on the journey to AI-assisted batch release. Merck is about to complete a pilot and begin an actual project. I was on that project call this morning. Andelyn's completed the POCs and the planning phase for a project. So two questions are, what do you hope to achieve? And what's the higher value? So in full transparency, I have a friend, 30-year veteran of, manufacturing systems, and I showed him the deck before I shared it here, and he was like, there's a reduction in effort, but there's also a reduction in improvement in working capital just by, getting the release done fast. I gave the example of a woman going on vacation. But so with your two efforts, what are you hoping to achieve? And where do you think the value unlock is? Is it effort? Bob, you just alluded to that. Is it working capital unlock? Certainly if it's 4 to 6 months of product being tied up. Brian, I'll let you go first.
Yeah, so I think it's, one of the big things about being in a CDMO is not just our time, but obviously our sponsors and our clients' time, right? And so when we think about the experience factor of working with a CDMO, how do you make that, easier? How do you enable the collaboration between the organizations? And to me, that flows through data, right? So that we're also a data company, because throughout this process, and Bob mentioned, this data will go into different filings and into future aspects. That the more that we're able to basically package that data up and present it back to our customers, so that they can make their decisions on wherever they are in the product lifecycle journey. That'll enable them to work better and faster and smarter as well, which then hopefully helps our customers and want to come back to us for more, right? So I think the idea is that it's really something that to help in that engagement, and to move things again further faster in the product life cycle. That how do we reduce time? How do we reduce areas where we currently have inefficiencies? And so a lot of that goes into prepping for the filings. How does it go into the actual again the batch release process? And we know that we're a component of this product life cycle, and the more that we're able to enable that, I think the better off industry will be.
Yeah, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but what you just described is the work is so federated, right? From processing the batch to the filing. It's that it takes a little effort to do the business case, right? It's
Mhm.
worthwhile effort, but it takes a team to do that.
Yep, absolutely.
Bob, what are your thoughts?
Um, the well, I guess on what specifically, Leonard? The
Yeah, so you're going down this journey to do AI assisted batch release. What did you hope to achieve?
yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, ultimately, we've done some estimation on what the uh, I guess how much time we can take out of people's day where they spend it on non-value added activities, right? And the we're thinking somewhere between, I don't know, 30 to 50% reduction in the amount of time it takes to do the same quality of review. And I'm hoping we can even get a higher quality review because we've automated uh a lot of aspects, a lot of tedious aspects of, going through a PDF of a paper batch record. So, I mean, ultimately, yeah, I I don't care so much about working capital in the development space because we're not
Right.
making our
Yep.
product
Yep.
for sale. It's more about just people's time and kind of increasing the cycle
Yep.
time while, perhaps turning the dial up a notch or two on on the quality of the review process itself. I mean, I don't know
Mhm.
how many people here have, scrolled through a 200-page PDF trying to find like a nugget of information to compare if it's the right nugget of information. But like, your mind kind of uh I, I don't want to say you go numb, but it's hard to maintain focus for a long duration when you're doing, you're spending, a minute looking at the thing that you care about, and then, 5 minutes scrolling to find the next nugget of information. And it's just not a fun job to do. And at least for a guy like me, my mind wanders on the occasions I've had to do it. So I again, ultimately I want to speed up, but I also just want to make it a more enjoyable work day for the people doing it, you know?
Yeah, yeah, agreed. Hey, first of all, I'm sure the listeners are glad they waited this long. They heard you 30 to 50% for the same quality, reduction in effort for the same quality. So that's not insignificant, right? And I know you're not, and you're doing small amount of batches, right? Commercial side, not large amount of batches. So
Yeah, yeah,
hugely impactful for the business. Yeah. And the way I always say it is life science companies are more than a business. They have a social contract to do good, but they're not less than a business. They have to make money to live up to those promises, right? So it matters. All right, only two more slides. This is the next to last slide, and it's this idea that I'm trying to get away from putting contention between the paper batch and the MES system, and say this is a journey, right? I think that working on one becomes a blueprint for the other. So you can see across the middle, I've got paper batches, maybe an EBR or an e-log book, or an MES system. In the paper batch, I digitize it so I can do the AI assisted batch release, but I also get the genealogy. I also get mapped and contextualized data pipelines for trending. And that if you start and say, let me digitize the paper batches and get these benefits, that you'll only make these downstream processes easier if and when you get there. Brian, would you agree with that? Is that part of your thinking in this journey?
Yeah, I definitely think so. And I think when you were showing the batch release slide earlier, and looking at getting to a concept of release by exception, that's
Yeah.
something that is, again, a cultural change for any organization. The more that the folks gain comfort in the data being in a digital format, in a review, and how that's being performed, I think helps from that transformation component. I think the more you have the process here where you're going through that, the effort of doing these reviews, you'll also learn some things about, I'd say, more data structures that then come back in from an implementation of an MES, like which we talked about, like which modules, or is it an MES Lite? Is it a certain bits? You can start to see more of the trends where issues occur, where there's complexities, or where there has to be more flexibility, and you can then start with your modular implementation of an MES based on actual data that comes out from this. So I think absolutely that it really does go with the more start with the end in mind at the batch release side of it, the data side of it, how it's going to be leveraged, and then working your way backwards to figure out where the highest value processes are to really transform.
Bob, he alluded to it. Release by exception. I mean, you alluded to it. He said it outright, right? That is the art of the possible. Do you think that the quality of the natural language processing and the workflows will get people there? Yeah.
Yeah, I guess it depends on the time horizon we're looking at.
Right. Yeah.
The in the next decade, yeah, it totally seems right. I'm not sure if the 3 to 5 year time horizon. I'm not
Right.
I,
Yeah.
I fully sold on how far we'll be in that time. But yeah, I mean, ultimately, um, I I see this technology moving really fast, and I can't believe, like, ChatGPT came out, like, it wasn't even 2 years ago, and look what it's
Yes.
done at that time. So, I mean, it's hard for my human mind to comprehend this exponential growth we're seeing.
Mm.
But
Yeah. That's right.
yeah, so release by exception is one of those things that it does seem feasible, but I'm not sure I put my money on it yet in the next 3 to 5 years. But that being said, I'll stand by my much more
Yeah. Yeah.
conservative, hey,
Yeah.
30 to
Yeah.
50% time savings, like that. That's a pretty
Yes.
easy
Yes.
to see
Yeah.
with
I agree.
technology we have today.
Yeah, that makes sense. All right, last slide, gentlemen. What final advice would you give someone on this journey who wants to go towards AI assisted batch release? And what's your thought on part of the possible? So obviously you're not going from low touch to no touch, not maybe in the next 3 to 5 years, but yeah, what advice would you give, and what do you think is the art of the possible? Bob, I'll start with you.
Uh, well, maybe I'll just go back to my fair data. Again, I think that's something we need to be doing all across our business to, uh, yeah, just make data, change our mindset that, we make physical products, we make medicines for people to cure them, but we also make data that, speaks to the veracity, the quality of the products. And if we don't start treating data in the same way that we treat our physical product, we're not a honestly, we're not a modern industry. So there's
Yeah.
that. But I also think, as far as advice for people going out on this journey, I've learned so much, getting in the trenches, like doing the hard work of, releasing a batch or reviewing a batch record. So you got to do it yourself. You got to talk to the people that are doing it, listen to their pain. Every time someone describes something that sucks, that's an opportunity to improve. And I think so much of our work together, Leonard, has been, talking to the people around me, saying the parts about their job that they really dislike the most, and then trying to figure out a way to solve that. And that's kind of what led us to doing this pilot with you is, people saying, hey, I'm spending all my time, scrolling through this 200-page document and it sucks. So I just want to encourage people to kind of listen to the folks around you on the pain points in their job and write them all down. And I really appreciate how we've, in the couple of years we've been working together, how we've, every time we come up with a new idea, you're always ready to listen and say, hey, here's this other kind of extension of how we're, how your product might benefit us in a different way. So I really appreciate that, and love to see how your product evolves and just, so I'd advise people to, continually update their thinking on what is the art of the possible, and don't be shy on sharing it.
No, I appreciate that. Good insights. Thanks, Bob. Brian, how about yourself?
Yeah, no, I love the fact that, Bob, you were mentioning there too about being a data company, because I think that is critical. And I think everything here starts with the fact that, you need to have the data strategy, right? And so what are the different areas of data that you're trying to capture? How is that going to be brought together? What are your ultimate use cases that you're trying to grow towards? And I think the biggest thing on the art of the possible is to really be unconstrained by current thoughts and current restrictions. That there's way more things that outside of our industry that different companies are doing, that they're creating. Things are moving at lightning speed. As Bob mentioned, there was 2 years ago ChatGPT hit mainstream, and now you can't go an hour without AI being in a conversation. So I think the real thing is to think big, and not be afraid by what thinking big could mean, and not thinking about the constraints that come in with it. That how we're able to really transform our way of working to leverage the technology. And again, whether it's human in the loop is still required, and where is going to be something that's going to be critical because of the nature of our industry and our business. But I would encourage everyone to think big.
All right, cool. So thank you, gentlemen. I am going to ask you to hang on for another minute here. I'm going to stop sharing. I did get a question here, and anyone else is free to post. I know some technical questions have been asked along the way. Been asked. So the question was, and either one of you guys can take it. What seems to be the current main roadblock in getting to an AI-assisted batch release?
I can start if you were.
Yeah,
Sure.
yeah, do it. Good.
I mean, it's still complicated, right? So I think that when you look at the different aspects of a transformation, you have the human element, the aspect of, okay, can I trust this computer that maybe it's 90%, maybe it's 92% accurate. It may not be 100% right now. Is a 90% computer readout better than a 93% human readout? And I think the fact is we never actually measure what the human capability is, or the errors that come from that. But somebody could then come out and say, oh, well, there's an issue with the computer, we can never go that way, and then it just becomes barriers put up. So I think it's how to work with it, how to train it, how to understand. Again, I mentioned the human in the loop, where that needs to be. And so I'd say that there's definitely a hesitation from that side, but I think there's also the excitement when you get the right people in the room that this is transformational.
That makes sense. Bob, thoughts on that?
I totally agree
Makes
on we don't uh, measure the accuracy of the human to have an adequate comparison to the accuracy of
That's fair.
the
That's fair.
AI. So I feel like we need to have some candid conversations about that. But the other thing is just I think this ratio of like how long does it take to train the AI versus how long does it take or how much time does the AI save, right? That ratio, the more favorable it is in time saving versus training time, the
Yep.
more this is going to be adopted. So I
Yep.
think, you know, I think we could all clearly see if you're doing a batch record, releasing it one time, AI is not good enough yet to have a benefit where, you want to spend time training it to do your batch release for that one time. But if you're doing it 1,000 times, it's very, very, advantageous to train the AI, right? And somewhere in there, there's a break even point, right? And that break even point is moving towards lower and lower training burden for the AI to provide that benefit. And so I think, we that's what I'm excited for is to see that continue to improve so we can use it earlier and earlier in our development cycle.
Makes
And
sense.
it's changing rapidly.
All right. I'm going to take one more question live, and then we'll definitely, everyone who asks a question will respond offline. But I'm going to see this guy tomorrow, so I should ask the question. Bob, I'll let you go first. Now that we have rich data set from such a tool, so we extract the key and critical parameters, right? You've seen this work done. Um, what are your views as to the requirement on how that data gets stored and shared, internal and external? Like it used to be safe in a file cabinet, and now it's in a database, right? You can provide access to it internally and externally. What's your view on how to protect that and what the guide rails should be?
I mean, I'll go back to my fair data um, uh, acronym again. That again, we're trying to default to open is something I heard from Google, right?
Mm,
So we within Merck and Company Inc. We have started centralizing our data in data lakes that are by default open accessible to
mm,
most everyone that has a asks for access. And so we try to make that data findable, accessible, and ultimately reusable. And so the guardrails are with rare exception are only that people have enough training to know how to use the data in a way that's not going to, I guess, not going to misuse the data. I'll put it that way.
mm,
And that's, most of my colleagues for the most part.
that makes sense. Hey, Brian, I'm going to let you answer this question as well because you're in an interesting spot, right? Because you host the data for a lot of different brands, right?
Mm-hmm.
So what's your
Yeah.
view about how to protect it and what to share? Yeah.
Yeah, no, so for us, obviously again, going back to the concept that we're a data company, and that we're a data steward for our clients, that, making sure that folks only have access to what they need. So at least privileged mentality outside of our walls is obviously required. I mean, we'd be out of business pretty quickly if we started sharing
Yeah.
data across the different areas. Now, I think there's a level of I'd say hesitation in industry, and not just our industry, across the board, as to what data can be used to inform other models. Could we use one customer's batch record to
Mm,
inform decisions on another one? My response is that we use the scientist's brain. So similarly, if they're looking at, they just performed this activity in a batch record before, why can't they use that same activity there? But again, it's not to necessarily inform certain aspects of the creation of the batch record or the creation of the recipe, right? So I think there's some fine line in how that's going to be, and I think we're going to ultimately get into how we draw out that the parameters of what different layers of data security are needed in those areas. But for us, again, it's going to be from different concepts of data marketplaces. How do we package up that data into its own unique data lake or data marketplace for a customer, as opposed to being in just one area where there's potential exposure. So it's going to follow all the same data considerations from the security, but ultimately more open internally and a lot less open externally.
I get it. Brian, Bob, I want to thank you both for your time. Your experience was evident and invaluable. On behalf of Mariana and the listeners, I want to thank you. And I hope to see you back here again soon. Barney, do you have a comment?
We have two questions actually. One
Okay.
is from Ben and another is from Dr. Stephen DeLeo. So you can see the chat window.
Okay, yeah. So we'll try this. I'll let one of you guys take. Any concern related to the validation challenges around AI?
I don't think any more so than any other electronic system. I mean, I'm going to give props to the folks that wrote the GMPs and the amendments like Part 11. They tell us for any system how are we going to validate it, and they're appropriately constrained but not overly constrained. So but I mean, for anybody that hasn't seen it, right, both FDA and EMA have issued discussion papers around use of AI in manufacturing for pharmaceuticals. Those have a lot of good points to take into account. But ultimately, I mean, this is a step or two past what we've been doing for a long time around, real-time release testing and spectroscopic machine learning to make predictions about the potency of a tablet, for example. So it's a more advanced than what we've done in the past, but it's not so advanced that we can't use a lot of the existing tools.
Yeah, that makes sense. And Parna, actually, what Ben is doing, and Ben, thank you for joining us, by the way. He was a keynote speaker at Contract Manufacturing event last week, and he's just putting everything we just said in context. Ben, I appreciate that very much. Thank you. And with that said, thank you again.